Europe isn't banning your car. It's doing something far more effective, and it's making sure you can't realistically keep it. And don't worry, they're going to try and do the same thing here in the US. That may sound dramatic, but stay with me for a few minutes because this isn't really a story about insurance. It isn't a story about electric vehicles. It isn't even a story about transportation. It's a story about control. And if you've been following my reporting over the last few years, you've probably noticed something. Many of the big changes affecting drivers don't arrive through a single headline, or a single law, or a single government announcement. They arrive through dozens of seemingly unrelated decisions that all move in the same direction. One new regulation, one new technology, one new requirement, one new fee, one new data collection program, one new safety initiative. Individually, each change sounds reasonable. Collectively, they begin to tell a much larger story. And that's exactly what's happening right now. There's more coming on this, so make sure to like and subscribe and click the bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. Insurance companies are saying they're trying to make roads safer and your premiums lower. That sounds pretty fair, doesn't it? But there's a lot more to it. That's the accepted narrative. The headline. That's what consumers are supposed to believe. And on the surface, it sounds reasonable. And if you're a safer driver, shouldn't you pay less? If you're a riskier driver, shouldn't you pay more? And most people would agree with that. And I would agree with that. But there's a question almost nobody's asking. When did insurance companies stop measuring risk and start managing behavior? Because those are two very different things. For more than 100 years, insurance companies operated in a fairly simple way. They looked at your driving history, your age, your location, your claims records, your vehicle, and a handful of other factors. Then they calculated risk and set a premium. They weren't interested in monitoring your every move. They weren't interested in scoring your behavior every time you got behind the wheel. Their business wasn't built around tracking your decisions. Their business was built around ensuring risk. Today, that relationship is changing, and most drivers didn't even realize it was happening. The future battle over transportation isn't about electric vehicles. It's not about autonomous vehicles, and it's not even about emissions. It's about data, your vehicle's data, your driving data, and ultimately, who controls it. Most Americans still think they own their vehicles, and in many ways they do. But increasingly, automakers, insurers, regulators, and technology companies view your vehicle a lot differently. To them, your vehicle isn't simply transportation. It's a connected platform, a rolling computer with data-generating machines that happen to have wheels. And every year, it collects more information. Every camera collects additional information that you may or may not know about. Think about what your vehicle already knows. It knows where you are. It knows where you've been. It knows how fast you're driving. It knows how hard you brake. It knows how aggressively you accelerate, and it knows how often you drive. It knows when you drive, and it knows how many miles you've traveled. And many vehicles know whether you're wearing a seatbelt. And the flock cameras, well, they'll confirm or deny that fact. They monitor things like eye movement, driver attention and distraction levels, steering inputs, and other behavioral patterns. Some monitor all passengers in your vehicle, in the first, second, and even the third row if you have one. And new cameras will listen to your conversation, decide if you're under the influence of anything. Maybe you're stressed, or even stable enough to drive safely. Yes, this is the new kill switch technology that I've been covering for a long time, and it's here, and it's the law. No worries, insurance companies will have access to all that data too. And every year, the amount of information being collected continues to grow. And automakers tell us this improves your safety. And insurance companies tell us this improves accuracy. And governments tell us it improves outcomes. And they're all right. But let's ask a slightly different question. Once all that information exists, who gets access to it? And what happens next? That's where things start to get a little bit interesting. Most Americans are focused on inflation, taxes, fuel prices, vehicle affordability, and the rising cost of insurance. And I understand that. But while consumers are dealing with those problems, something bigger is quietly happening in the background. Across Europe, insurers, regulators, automakers, and technology companies are increasingly discussing concepts built around what some industry insiders are calling transparent customer. Remember that name, transparent customer, because what the heck is the transparent customer? You're not going to like this one, I promise. It's not a phrase most Americans have heard. If the term starts in Europe, you know it's going to spread globally. And frankly, that's part of the reason you should pay attention to it, because some of the biggest changes in public policy begin as industry discussions long before they become mainstream news. The name sounds harmless. That's the plan. It even sounds positive. But who doesn't want transparency? But transparency sounds very different depending upon who is expected to be transparent. And you already know the answer to that. Insurance companies aren't talking about becoming transparent. They're talking about you becoming transparent, and that's a very different conversation. The idea behind transparent customer is simple. The more information insurers have, the more accurately they can predict your risk. At least that's the theory. And on the surface, it sounds logical. And if one driver presents a higher risk than another, shouldn't insurance pricing reflect that? Yeah. But let's follow the logic all the way down the road. If driving behavior matters, collect driving data. If mileage matters, collect mileage data. If location matters, collect location data. And if vehicle usage matters, collect vehicle usage data. If financial stability influences risk, collect financial information. If lifestyle choices influence outcomes, collect that lifestyle information. Now you know where this is going. Eventually, the question stops being how much information is enough and becomes, is there any information they don't want? Because the pursuit of perfect risk assessment never ends. There's always another metric, another score, a profile, or a data point. Anyway, another layer of information comes in, they can use it. And that's where the story starts to become uncomfortable. Because at some point, insurance stops being about measuring risk and starts becoming about managing your behavior. That distinction matters a lot. Insurance used to react to outcomes. Now it's increasingly attempting to influence decisions before outcomes occur. Think about telematics programs, usage-based insurance and driver monitoring, and behavioral scoring. And millions of drivers have already signed up for all those onboard diagnostic tools that go underneath your dash. Many of them are voluntary, and they're supposed to help you save money. The pitch is simple. Share your driving data. It's that little dongle. You plug it in under the dash. It's really easy, and it's supposed to prove that you're a safe driver. You may receive a discount. Who doesn't want a discount? Who doesn't like to save money? And you can always opt out. Sure, if you remember to, or even know how. But look at what's actually happening. Everything is getting measured. Your acceleration, braking, mileage, usual driving times, and habits, they get measured. And your behavior gets scored. And suddenly, your insurance company isn't simply evaluating whether you're risky, it's evaluating whether you're compliant. Risk and compliance are not the same thing. And that's the important distinction that doesn't get enough attention. And this leads us to something else that rarely gets discussed: the value of your data itself. This is where the story starts making a lot more sense. Most drivers think they bought a vehicle. Increasingly, what they actually bought was a vehicle and a data platform. And here's the part nobody's talking about. Your vehicle may be worth more after you buy it than before you buy it. Not because the vehicle itself, because of the information it generates. Think about that for a moment. You make the payments, you buy the fuel, you pay for the insurance, the maintenance, and the repairs, and you assume the risk. Okay, and then your vehicle spends years generating information that has value to someone else. That's every trip, every route, every destination, every braking event, every acceleration event, every service visit, every habit, every pattern, everything you do. And data has become the product, and you're producing it every single day. And most consumers never agreed to being data producers. Most consumers thought they bought a car. Yet increasingly, the vehicle is generating information that has significant value throughout the entire ecosystem of the companies. Everyone wants access to your data. It's more valuable than ever. And insurance companies, technology companies, data analytics firms, data brokers, marketing firms, they want access to it too. Government agencies as well. Literally everybody. And whenever everybody wants the same thing, it's usually worth asking why. The answer is very simple. Data is valuable, and your data is being sold for big money. And more accurately, a company that can predict your behavior, the more money it can make. And that's true in advertising and technology and finance, and definitely true in insurance. Which brings us to another question. If your data is that valuable, enough for everyone to want it, why are consumers the primary beneficiaries? Why are you not getting paid for your data? Well, as I always say, Follow the money. Because whenever you follow the money, the story usually becomes a little bit clearer. And in this case, the money is leading us somewhere very interesting. And that's where the story starts getting a lot bigger than insurance. Because once you understand the data has become a product, a lot of things that didn't make sense before suddenly start making perfect sense. Why do companies want vehicles connected to the internet? Why are automakers investing billions of dollars in software? Why are insurers pushing telematics programs? And why are regulators increasingly interested in connecting transportation system? Why does every conversation seem to lead back to data collection? Because information has become one of the most valuable commodities in the modern economy, and the transportation industry is sitting on a gold mine of it. And that's why I always tell people to follow the money, not because it's dramatic, but because it actually works. Whenever government agencies, insurance companies, and automakers, and technology firms, and software providers, and analytics companies, telematics companies, and consultants all start moving in the same direction, I want to know who benefits. Who's making the big dollars? Well, insurance companies benefit from more precise pricing, and technology companies benefit from more data, and automakers benefit from connecting services and subscription fees. We've seen that before, and we've covered that before, because this is a huge profit center. Cloud providers, data centers that you see being built up everywhere, and the analytics firms benefit from storing information. Consultants benefit from helping companies navigate increasingly complex compliance systems, and government agencies, they benefit from better visibility and reporting so they know more about you. Everyone involved can point to a legitimate reason for participating. And that's what makes this so interesting. Nobody has to be acting with bad intentions. Nobody has to be plotting a secret room. Every participant can honestly believe they're solving a problem. Insurance companies want better risk assessment, and governments want safer roads. Who doesn't want safer roads? Automakers want new revenue streams, and technology companies want innovation, which also leads to money. Consumers want discounts. Each objective sounds reasonable. But when all those objectives start moving in the same direction, consumers should be paying attention, because the cumulative effect may look very different from the original intention. And that's exactly why I keep coming back to the one word: control. Not ownership, control. Ownership and control are not the same thing. You can technically own something while somebody else increasingly controls how it's used. You can technically own something while somebody else determines the rules governing access, pricing, monitoring, and compliance. And that's where the story becomes much more important than insurance premiums. Remember, many people were told this wasn't happening in the so-called kill switch debate. There's no such thing, right? That's false. I've been reporting on Section 24220 of the 2021 Infrastructure Act that was signed by President Biden for years. And I have been reporting on this, and no one believed it and everyone poo-pooed it. Even though some congressmen have discussed it on Capitol Hill, still it went through as a law. Still it's being funded. So this is 100% true, 100% funded, and 100% the new law. If you've followed my reporting, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For years, concerns about vehicle intervention technology were dismissed. People were told they misunderstood the legislation. People were told they were overreacting. And people were told nobody's trying to interfere with your vehicle operation. Then people started reading the actual language, and suddenly the conversation changed. Federal regulators were directed to pursue advanced impaired driving prevention technology, and supporters argued the goal was simple: stop drunk driving and save lives. And most Americans support that goal. I support that goal. Nobody wants impaired drivers on the road. But let's focus on something far more important than just the basic intent of the law. A vehicle that can monitor behavior is capable of collecting data and can build profiles. And a vehicle that can communicate with onboard systems is capable of intervention. Today, the justification is impaired driving. Tomorrow, it could be something else. And I'm not saying that that's the plan. I'm saying that's the capability. And those are two very different things. Technology doesn't care why it was created. Technology only cares about what it's capable of doing. History teaches us that capability tends to expand, not shrink. Think about how many technologies started with one purpose and ended up serving 10 others. This is not a conspiracy theory. The same thing happens in government, business, technology. Once a capability exists, somebody eventually finds another use for it. That's human nature. And that's why consumers should always evaluate technology based on what it can do, not simply what it currently is being used for, because the future is rarely limited by today's intentions. Who is most likely to feel the impact of all of this? Owners of older cars, the working American driving a paid-off truck, the family hanging on to an older SUV because replacing it would cost a fortune, the enthusiast maintaining a classic collector car, which I'm a part of, and the person who simply wants to keep driving the vehicle they already own, which is many of us. These people rarely appear in policy discussions, and they rarely are considered in most of these decisions, but they're often the first to feel the consequences, and many people assume that if governments and regulations and industries want to eliminate older vehicles, they would simply ban them. I don't think that's how it happens. The push would be huge, especially with car collectors. In fact, I think that's the least likely approach. Bans create resistance, and economic pressures create compliance. And you don't need to outlaw an older vehicle, confiscate it, or make ownership illegal. You simply make ownership progressively more difficult. Insurance becomes harder to find and more expensive. Service parts become harder to source and repair costs increase. I've covered that recently on another video. Compliance with inspections and registration requirements become more complicated. More emission regulations are added, and the vehicle remains legal, and you can still technically own it. You just can't use it in the way you once could. But owning it becomes next to impossible. And that's a very different form of control. And in many ways, it's far more effective than a ban, because people eventually surrender choices that become too expensive to maintain. Not because they wanted to, but because the economics stopped making sense. Look at what's already happening in parts of Europe. They have low emissions zones. Then they added congestion pricing, and cities have vehicle access restrictions where you can't drive a car or it has to be electric. There are new insurance incentives to get you out of your old car, and the government piles on compliance requirements because they want to force you to make change. And individually, each policy has a justification. Collectively, they create pressure. Pressure changes behavior, and behavior is what the entire conversation is really all about. This makes you want to change to comply. Which brings us back to the transparent customer, because once you start looking at transportation through that lens, the pieces begin fitting together. The insurance companies want connected vehicles that have driver monitoring so they can bill you by usage-based insurance. And this forces digital identity systems that are based on behavioral scoring. Then the companies can take that information and monetize your vehicle data. It's another source of income for them. And all of that advanced intervention technologies, or kill switches, are all built around the same fundamental concept. Insurance companies want and need more information, more visibility, more insight to you, your lifestyle, and every bit of information, because this gives them more predictability. And ultimately, this gives them more influence on how you live your life. And this is the part where I usually put on my tinfoil hat. Not because I'm claiming some grand conspiracy. Quite the opposite, because I think the reality is actually more interesting. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe connected vehicles collecting more data, insurance companies wanting more information, and governments building more digital systems, and automakers creating more connected platforms, and technology companies expanding behavioral analytics are completely unrelated developments. Just collecting innocent information about you. Maybe. But if they're not, what exactly are we building? That's the question I keep coming back to. Nobody involved has to be malicious, and nobody involved has to be lying or have bad intentions. Every participant can point to a reasonable objective. That concern isn't the individual objectives. That concern is the direction, because every road seems to lead to the same destination. What we are seeing is more monitoring, more connectivity, more data collection, which leads to more behavioral analysis. That means insurance companies have more intervention, less anonymity, and less privacy for you, and potentially less control for drivers. I do not think it's a prediction. It's an observation that leads to you giving up your freedom. Let's face it, the infrastructure already exists, and so does the technology. They've already laid out the incentives and created the business model. The question is no longer whether these systems can be built. They're already being built. The real question is where the boundaries should be. How much information is too much? Who owns the data? Who profits from it? And who has access to it? How long is it stored, and where is it stored, and how is it protected? And perhaps, most importantly, who decides? Because ultimately, what every debate about technology becomes is this: who decides what information gets collected, how it's used and how it's shared and how it affects your pricing? Does all this information affect mobility? These are questions that should matter to you. They matter because transportation has always represented something larger than simply getting from one place to another. For generations, the automobile represents freedom, opportunity, independence, and choice. The ability to go where you want, when you want, without asking permission. And that's happening in Europe right now. You need permission to leave your city. Here in America, most Americans still view driving through that lens. We want the freedom. They want their privacy. They want to be able to go where they want, when they want. And the question is whether the institutions sharing the future of transportation still do. Because the future battle over transportation isn't about electric vehicles. It's not about autonomous vehicles. And it's not even about emissions. It's about data, your data. And the side that controls the data increasingly controls your experience, which brings us to the most important question of all. Who actually controls the vehicle? The person making the payments, the person holding the title, the person paying the insurance premium, or the growing network of insurers, software providers, regulators, technology platforms, and data companies that increasingly influence how the vehicle operates, how it's monitored, and how it's scored, how it's insured, and ultimately, how it's used. I'm sure you can put this all together very quickly and know this does not sound like a good plan. Will you be able to drive when you want to go somewhere? Or will the kill switch deny you that freedom? That's not just an insurance question. That's an ownership question. It's about privacy and a serious freedom question. It's a question every driver should be asking before somebody else answers it for them. Keep your ears open for the term transparent customer, because this is a sign that you don't want to read. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.